Ever tried to imagine, like, how companies go about updating these huge software systems they've got without, bringing everything to a grinding halt? It's not like hitting pause when things get slow, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. We're talking about a massive undertaking here. It's almost like, trying to do open heart surgery while the patient's running a marathon.
That's a pretty intense image. And that's exactly the challenge we're going to be tackling in this deep dive. We're going deep, really deep, into how companies modernize those old, kind of clunky software applications using something called Amazon EKS. Now, for those who aren't swimming in acronyms all day, that's Amazon's managed Kubernetes service. And our trusty guide for this adventure, a real-world AWS architecture diagram and some seriously insightful explanations that came along with it.
What really struck me about this diagram is how it shows a hybrid setup. This isn't some pie-in-the-sky scenario. It's about companies taking these massive old applications, you often hear them called monolithic applications, and finding ways to bring them step by step into a more modern and flexible way of doing things.
Hybrid environment, huh? So we're not talking about a complete system overhaul here.
Not at all. Ripping everything out and starting over, way too risky, way too complex. This diagram shows us a more gradual approach, where those legacy applications, the ones comfortably humming along on VMware Cloud, that's a platform perfect for these big old systems, can actually work side by side with these newer microservices running on EKS.
So instead of bulldozing the whole thing, it's more like renovating a house, one room at a time.
Spot on. And that's where these microservices come into play. Think of it this way. Instead of one giant software application trying to do it all, you break it down into smaller, independent services, each handling its own little piece of the puzzle. They all work together, of course, but each one's got its specialty.
Okay, so instead of one massive Swiss Army knife, you've got specialized tools for each job. Got it. But why is this approach so powerful? What's the real advantage of breaking things down like this?
The beauty of microservices is all about independence. They can be developed, deployed, updated, all on their own schedules. Need to tweak one small part of your application, no need to redeploy the whole shebang. This means you can move much faster, be way more agile.
Ah, so that's how you avoid that dreaded "we're down for maintenance" message that pops up at the worst possible time. Makes sense. But this diagram makes it look, I don't know, almost easy. What's really going on in the background to make this modernization magic happen?
Well, it all starts with the developers. See them there in the diagram, diligently committing code to a repository called AWS Code Commit.
I see it.
That action kicks off a chain reaction. AWS CodePipeline steps in. Think of it as the automated project manager for this whole operation.
So no more manual processes, no more late-night deployments, right?
Yeah.
Everything's automated.
You got it. CodePipeline takes those code changes and sets off a whole series of automated steps. It uses another service, AWS CodeBuild, to package the code with all its dependencies and builds what's called a Docker image. Imagine a Docker image like a lightweight portable container for your application code.
So the Docker image is all packed up and ready to go. Where does it go next? Straight into the EKS environment.
Not quite. It gets sent over to Amazon ECR, which stands for Elastic Container Registry. Think of it as a secure, scalable haven for all those Docker images, where they're stored and managed.
Like a digital library, but for application containers.
Perfect analogy. And ECR is tightly integrated with other AWS services, which makes deploying and managing these applications a breeze, even at a huge scale. But let's get back to that deployment process. CodeBuild's job isn't over yet. It uses a tool called kubectl to communicate with the Kubernetes API. It's basically saying, hey, Kubernetes, we've got a new version of this app ready when you are.
And that's where Kubernetes works its orchestration magic, right? What happens next?
Kubernetes kicks off something called a rolling update. Sounds cool, right? And it is. Imagine this. You need to change a tire on a car, but the car is still moving. That's essentially what Kubernetes does. It swaps out those old instances of the application with the new ones, all without any downtime for the users. Pretty slick, huh?
Now, that is seriously impressive. Talk about a seamless magic trick for software. We're not quite done yet, though, right? Users still need to be able to access this newly updated application. I'm guessing this is where the network load balancer enters the scene.
You're right on the money. The network load balancer is like the air traffic control for your application. It makes sure that all those requests coming in from users are directed to the right place, whether it's the legacy part of the application still on VMware Cloud or those shiny new microservices running on EKS. All about smoothing that transition during modernization.
So the network load balancer is like the invisible hand making sure the user experience is smooth, even with all this intricate choreography happening behind the scenes.
Speaking of intricate, we haven't even touched on the database side of things. Databases are like the heart and soul of many applications, right? How does this modernization approach handle those?
That's such a crucial point, and the diagram actually highlights one of the big strategic decisions companies make here. Instead of going through this massive database migration right off the bat, they let the existing database tier stay put on VMware Cloud.
Hold on, they're putting off the database migration. Why would they do that?
Remember that analogy about swapping an engine on a moving race car? So they're basically buying themselves some time, right? Minimizing the risk in this initial modernization phase by delaying that big database migration. Kind of like building that new runway alongside the old one before you reroute all the air traffic. Seems like a smart move.
Exactly. It lets them really focus on getting those microservices up and running smoothly, make sure everything's working together without putting the whole system at risk. They can always tackle the database migration later down the line, maybe when they have a bit more breathing room or when they're not relying quite as much on that legacy system.
It's like a strategic trade-off they're making, not ignoring the database migration entirely. It really makes you think about modernizing these legacy applications as this step-by-step process, not just one giant leap.
Absolutely. It's iterative. You don't have to do it all at once. Take it one step at a time, learn from each step, and gradually your system starts to evolve.
Which really lines up with that whole agile DevOps philosophy we touched on earlier. It's all about continuous improvement, adapting as you go, embracing change. Speaking of embracing change, I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier, AWS App2 Container. Sounds like it could be a pretty powerful tool. What exactly does it do?
Okay, imagine you've got a team of expert movers. Like they can magically pack up all your stuff, your furniture, everything into these perfectly sized boxes, all labeled and ready to go. That's essentially what AWS App2 Container does, but for your applications.
So instead of developers having to figure out all the nitty-gritty details of packaging their applications into these Docker containers, App2 Container just automates that whole process. That's going to be a huge time saver.
You got it. App2 Container analyzes your application code, figures out all the dependencies, and then it packages it all up nice and neat into those Docker containers ready to be deployed on EKS.
That's amazing. It's like they took this huge chunk of complexity and just like vaporized it. And it's no wonder more and more development teams are turning to this kind of approach.
It's a real game changer, no question. And it highlights something really important about modernizing these legacy applications. It's not just about the technology, it's about the people and the processes too.
Now, that's a really important point. We've been geeking out about all the technical stuff, but what about the human side of this whole transformation? How does this approach affect the people who actually have to build and maintain these systems?
Well, it requires a bit of a mindset shift, and not just for the developers, but really for the entire organization. Imagine going from steering a giant cargo ship to, say, navigating a speedboat.
Now, that's what I call a change of pace. So what kind of adjustments do teams need to make to really thrive in this new world?
Well, developers definitely need to be ready to embrace new tools, new technologies, even new ways of working. Agile methodologies, DevOps practices, those become essential. It's about collaboration, automation, constantly finding ways to improve. Operations teams, they've got to adapt to a much more dynamic, automated environment using things like infrastructure as code and other cloud-native tools. And even the business stakeholders, they need to understand and get on board with this idea of iterative development and continuous delivery.
So we're talking about a cultural shift as much as a technological one, but change isn't always easy, especially in large organizations. What are some of the challenges that companies might bump into when they start down this road of modernization?
Well, resistance to change, it's only natural. Some team members, they might be comfortable with the old ways of doing things. It can be tough to learn new technologies, to adapt to new processes. It's understandable.
Of course, change can be daunting, even if it comes with a lot of exciting possibilities.
Absolutely. That's why communication is key. Collaboration is key, and strong leadership is absolutely crucial for guiding a transformation like this to a successful outcome. It's about bringing everyone along on the journey, explaining the why behind the what, and empowering those teams to embrace those new ways of working.
So it's not just about throwing new tools and technology at the problem. It's about fostering a culture of learning, collaboration, continuous improvement.
100%. It's about creating an environment where those teams are actually excited to experiment, to learn from their mistakes, and to always be on the lookout for ways to do things better.
And that brings us back to those broader implications you were talking about earlier. You hinted that this move towards modernizing legacy applications could really change the future of how software is developed. What's your vision for the future of software development in this world that's increasingly dominated by the cloud?
I think we're seeing a real paradigm shift in how software is built and delivered. Cloud computing, microservices, DevOps, these are all ushering in a new era. Agility, scalability, innovation, that's what it's all about. And we'll see more and more of a move away from those big monolithic applications towards these more modular microservices-based architectures.
So more specialized tools for specific jobs, like we were talking about before. It makes sense breaking things down into smaller, manageable components. That's going to lead to a lot more flexibility, faster innovation cycles.
Exactly. And with that shift, there's going to be this growing demand for cloud native technologies and people who really know how to use them. Cloud platforms like AWS, with all those managed services they offer, like EKS, they're going to become even more crucial to the whole software development and delivery process.
It's almost like the cloud is becoming the new operating system for the entire digital world.
That's a great way to put it. We're also going to see even more emphasis on automation. Tools like CodePipeline and CodeBuild, the ones that automate those build and deployment processes, those are going to keep evolving, becoming even more sophisticated, even more tightly integrated.
So less time wrestling with infrastructure headaches and more time for developers to focus on, the good stuff, writing elegant code, creating amazing user experiences.
Exactly. And lastly, I think this modernization wave is going to create a need for a new generation of IT professionals, people who are comfortable working in these cloud-native, agile, DevOps-driven environments. Forget that old stereotype of IT folks stuck in the basement. These are the people who are out there driving innovation, shaping the future of technology.
It's definitely an exciting time to be working in software development, that's for sure. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's bring it back to our architecture diagram. There's one piece of the puzzle we haven't talked about yet. It's tucked away kind of subtly, but it's obviously playing a critical role. Route 53. Can you shed some light on what it does and why it's important in this whole modernization dance?
You've got a sharp eye. Route 53, that's Amazon's own DNS service. Now, it might seem like a small detail, but it's actually the unsung hero that keeps everything running smoothly.
So Route 53, for those of us who haven't spent, every waking moment in the AWS ecosystems, like the internet's phone book, right? It's how our computers find those websites we're looking for using those easy to remember names instead of those crazy long IP addresses.
That's a great way to think about it. It's a DNS service domain name system. And in this architecture we've been looking at, it's the one making sure all the traffic's flowing in the right direction. Like picture a really, really good receptionist making sure your request goes to the right department every single time. When someone's trying to use this application, Route 53 jumps in and says, okay, you go over here, whether that's to the legacy parts of the application or those new microservices we were talking about.
So even though it's just kind of hanging out there in the corner of the diagram, Route 53 is really the entry point for everyone trying to use this application. It's like the behind-the-scenes hero, making sure the whole thing runs smoothly right from the start. And you know what? That's actually a pretty good metaphor for this whole modernization process, don't you think? I mean, we've talked about the upsides, right? The agility, the scalability, those faster innovation cycles. But what about the other side of the coin? Are there downsides to all this? What kind of challenges might companies face as they start down this road of modernization?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that every company should be asking themselves. Because while the benefits of modernizing are, they're huge, it's not as easy as waving a magic wand. There are definitely some potential bumps in the road, one of the biggest ones. Complexity, especially early on. You're dealing with this hybrid environment where some parts of the system are still on that older infrastructure, and some are making their way to the cloud. It's a juggling act, for sure.
It sounds like it takes a lot of really careful planning to make sure you don't end up with something even more complicated and harder to manage than what you started with.
Right. Companies really need to go into this with a clear plan, the right people on board who know what they're doing, and the willingness to, adapt and learn as they go. Modernization isn't something you just jump into head first.
It's a journey, not a race, as they say.
Exactly. There are going to be challenges that pop up, things you didn't expect, times when you need to adjust your course. But the payoff, a more agile, responsive IT infrastructure that's actually ready for whatever's coming next, I think it's worth it.
Well said. It's about recognizing that there will be challenges, facing them head on, but never losing sight of that bigger goal. This has been a fascinating deep dive, to say the least. We've gone deep into the technical weeds, talked about the strategic choices companies have to make, even touched on how this impacts company culture as a whole.
I've really enjoyed exploring this with you. It's pretty amazing to see how these concepts and technologies have the power to completely transform businesses and really lay the foundation for a more agile, innovative future.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. Taking these complex topics, breaking them down, and hopefully making them not just understandable, but dare I say, a little bit exciting.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, technology is just a tool, right? What really matters is how we use these tools to solve problems, create value, and really unlock those possibilities.
And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners to ponder those possibilities. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. And remember, this journey of exploration, of discovery, it never really ends. So until next time, keep learning, keep those questions coming, and keep diving deep into the amazing world of technology.